All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about overcoming intrusive thoughts. And specifically, we're going to talk about overcoming intrusive thoughts related to harm or harmful intrusive thoughts, however you want to say it. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. Now, before we dive into this episode, just wanted to bring to your awareness, and down in the notes are a few links where you can get a free guide as well as access to our 2-day workshop that we recently did on breaking out of OCD and anxiety, or breaking free from OCD and anxiety. And I go in depth into a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here, but really way more in depth. And then if you would really help out our show by liking and subscribing, or even leaving a comment below, or even if you really want to go above and beyond, we also have if you could leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff would really help the algorithm of the show and help us out greatly. And if you feel compelled to support the show, we have a link in the notes where you can do that as well through PayPal. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into overcoming intrusive thoughts. So we're on this series. We've talked about intrusive thoughts. We talked about how when you try to don't stop, you try to stop intrusive thoughts, they get worse and worse and worse. We talked about the white bear effect and the ironic process by Daniel Wagner. And then we also in the last episode we talked about sexual intrusive thoughts, and I was kind of breaking down the difference between, again, those like sexual intrusive thoughts versus like sexual desires and fantasies, and the difference, right? And really a lot of that is going to overlap here into the intrusive harmful thoughts. So there's many manifestations that this can take on here when it comes to intrusive harmful thoughts. And what I mean by that is there's many different experiences someone can have. And the main thing I want to focus on right away is this idea of egotistonic and egosyntonic. So the ego, again, is our self-concept. It's our lowest level of consciousness, right? And the interesting thing about these thoughts is even on our lowest plane of consciousness, which is the ego, we still recognize these thoughts as uncharacteristic and not representing what we truly want. That's what egotistonic is, right? It's this idea that these thoughts aren't a representation of what I want, the who I am, what I desire, all of that, right? We have this awareness that these thoughts are intrusive, right, by their very nature. When a thought is egosyntonic, on the other hand, it's in alignment with who we understand ourselves to be at that time. It's in alignment with what we want, right? And it doesn't bother us, right? An egosyntonic thought is not going to cause anxiety, right? Like, so if let's say that you, again, steal things for a living, right? And that's how you make money in this world, which is, again, a pretty low level way to make money, not one that I recommend or subscribe to. It's just not a helpful thing for society. But anyways, let's say that that's what you do. When you have a thought about stealing something, it doesn't bother you because that's, again, it aligns with what you do day in, day out. So same kind of thing here with when we're talking about harmful intrusive thoughts. The first thing that we want to talk about is this idea of egotistonic and egosyntonic. With harmful intrusive thoughts, we are talking about thoughts that are again, in that egodystonic nature, meaning the person themselves is like, I don't know why I'm having these thoughts. These thoughts are not something that I want. They are not something I in any way want to act on. And they're very, very disturbing to me. Okay. And then the categories that these harmful thoughts can take on are things like, causing harm to others, right? Whether it's impulsive, like what if I impulsively grab this item and hurt this person, right? And in almost every case I've ever seen, these people that have these intrusive thoughts have no history of ever engaging in this, nor engage in any of this behavior. Okay. It's not an impulse control issue. In fact, it's almost the exact opposite of an impulse control issue. But the fear of what if I snap and do something totally uncharacteristic, like hurting someone I love, hurting my child, right? whether it's a parent and an infant, right? What if I snap and smother my baby, right? Like these are thoughts that people have had, and again, they generally, I want to emphasize, cause the person so much pain and distress that they will avoid holding their child. They'll avoid being around the people who they have these thoughts around, and and so on and so forth, right? And then there's thoughts about self-harm. What if I snap one day and harm myself? What if I end my own life one day, right? And again, these are different from actual suicidal thoughts. Okay. Like where the person's truly suicidal, right? Like the person's like, I want to end my own life. These people are having thoughts of like, oh my gosh, what if I do this one day? I don't want to do this. And then they get into these arguments with themselves about why they don't want to do this and why. And so and then there's, driving with your vehicle. What if I hit someone with my car and I didn't realize it? What if I accidentally hurt a kid one day, right? Or even I'm walking along a balcony or up on a hotel, and what if I just spontaneously jump off the roof? Like the idea of the end result of harm, right? And there's so many ways. And so some people might have verbal thoughts. Some people might have more images that pop in their mind, right? Because there's different ways of people think, right? Some people think in language, some people think in more imagery. So these intrusive thoughts, right, just bombard this individual, that's experiencing this. And what happens is that the person not only reacts with fear and anxiety to the initial thought, but then they get caught up in this idea of like, well, what does this thought mean? Why did I have this thought? What does this mean about me? Am I some sick, twisted person? And then these secondary thoughts come in. Okay. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about what are harmful, intrusive thoughts. They can take on any variation you can imagine. Like there's no way I could list all the different types of thoughts that I've heard people disclose, when it comes to this particular theme. And again, to really clarify, I also have heard, right, in session where people really do have intent to hurt people, really do have intent to hurt themselves, and really have what would be more egosyntonic, harmful thoughts. And they are so different. It is like apples and oranges, right? And because again, the person, I can think of a couple instances, but I'll share kind of a story that's merges a couple events, just to make sure, I'm not disclosing anything. But I've had people like talk about how they happily fantasize about hurting people, and where you're like, and there's no anxiety, no distress, no, there's no internal disturbance, right? Because the person really desires to do something like that, right? Or really doesn't have a problem with those ideas anyway. Those are very different issues. Okay. Those are very, very different issues. When I was doing the assessment and the person told me that, I was asking questions consistently about like, hey, like really trying to understand if this person, like what was going on. And again, if you have OCD and anxiety, your mind right now might be like, oh my gosh, what if that's actually me? And what if, so the point is that when someone has these intrusive thoughts, and the first thing we're looking for is that egotistonic, that reaction to them. You wouldn't think the thoughts are intrusive, right? If they were egosyntonic, you wouldn't see them as intrusive. So that's like the first indicator. Then we talked about kind of the secondary, all the different types of intrusive thoughts. And then the third point that I kind of want to talk about here is this idea of automatic versus willful thought. And to really separate this, and Michael Singer talks about this in his new book, Living Untethered, where he has a chapter on the idea of automatic versus willful thought. And when you are dealing with a lot of emotion in the body, especially fear, anxiety, it's natural for the mind to start producing a lot of automatic thought. And these intrusive thoughts fall into this automatic thought category, not the willful thought. Like you can willfully create the image of a fire hydrant in your mind right now. Right? Now you can just willfully do that. And then there's the idea of the thoughts that happen automatically. Okay. And those thoughts are generally fueled by emotion. by just emotion in the body. That's why, when we do the AAA response, right, what I teach through in my course, Taking Back Control, it's all about, again, not getting in the mind and moving more into the body, working with the anxiety, right, and really moving our awareness into the body. Because when you start trying to get into the content of the mind and trying to analyze, why do I have this thought? What does this mean? What does this mean about me? It spirals out of control very quickly. This is why you can't go and do talk therapy about intrusive thoughts, because it ends up making people worse almost in every case that I've seen, because you talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and you get nowhere, because the intrusive thoughts, again, aren't reflective of the person, of some deep, dark desires of the person. The intrusive thoughts, in fact, are usually the exact opposite of the character of the person at hand. That's why it's usually so, it's like oftentimes like the, people that have the intrusive thoughts. I mean, that's why even the mere thought of it in their mind is so distressing to the individual, that oftentimes they'll isolate themselves. They'll, hide from people they love in order to, quote unquote, protect them. And that's why when you understand this issue from the, the perspective of OCD and anxiety, and you understand, that loop that people get caught in, it's so important that you focus on the behavioral aspect of the loop, and it's specifically all the mental behaviors, right? So when we're talking about overcoming intrusive thoughts, especially related to harm, again, you really want to understand it from a loop perspective, and you want to understand it from, again, these thoughts are egotistonic. They're not a reflection of you. They're not a reflection of some deep, dark part of your psyche. And more importantly, from the behavioral aspect, you want to start to work to eliminate the behaviors that are reinforcing the loop, like we always talk about. And so it's specifically with the harm, this is going to be things like avoiding, objects that you're afraid of, avoiding people you're afraid of, getting reassurance, as well as all the mental behaviors like, mental reassurance, thought checking, thought suppressing, thought replacement, mentally praying, distracting yourself, trying to, again, stay really, really busy so you don't have to, again, like deal with what's going on internally. There's so many things people do. And that's why if you're wrestling with this, it's important to get guidance, right? I mean, I will say that I don't recommend that you just, listen to this episode and then try to go and implement this on your own. It's important to make sure you're doing the right things, because the number one thing that keeps people stuck is that they're doing behaviors without realizing it. So when you can really move into eliminating all the behaviors, that is what breaks the wheel. And ultimately, when the emotional work is done, and you've really, processed and in many ways released a lot of the stress energy that's in your body, or the, the fear and anxiety, from there, then the mind quiets down. And then that's when you really start to see the progress start happening, and you can start to believe in the tools more and more. So, and again, that's done through exposure response prevention and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, when it comes to the intrusive thoughts, I just wanted to talk about this one category real quick, because it's very common and a lot of people suffer in silence, and there's no reason to suffer, and there's no reason to continue suffering if you're experiencing this, because there are effective ways to break out of this loop, and letting go of the stories about this is such a huge part of people's recovery, and not thinking that they're bad people because these automatic thoughts are popping up in their mind. So hope that helps. And again, check out the links in the notes. And again, please support our show by liking and subscribing and leaving a comment. And with that said, we will continue on this series. And in the next episode, we're probably going to talk about scrupulosity or intrusive thoughts related to one's faith or religion. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a great week. See you guys soon.